very ambitious program this morning, not only to have a lively discussion with you in this room, but we also have a live stream. So we'll be trying to take questions from Twitter using the hashtag NNINEP, so NNINEP. And we'll start with the keynote speech, and we're very honored to have Commissioner Kroes here. She's responsible for Europe's digital agenda, and last week she's already paved the way for this morning by making a plea for everyone to back her in seeking to realize a single telecoms market before the end of the mandate. And I think many of you, many of us, have heard this call, and we support this effort. And in this speech, she also mentioned net neutrality, and I'm glad that we can agree that business as usual is no longer working to preserve a level playing field in the European Union. For competition and innovation, it is essential that net neutrality is enshrined in law, but the Commissioner also cautioned that it may not be possible to get everything we dream of in a digital single market package. And of course, in politics, we are always trying to be realistic, but we also know that you're ambitious, and we look forward very much to hearing the details of the plans, because that will be key in what will be the outcome. Now, beyond arguments of competition and the level playing field, net neutrality is essential to keep the internet open there, and beyond economic interest, there's also a very important public interest to safeguard. Current practices by telecom and internet service providers, such as blocking and throttling of free competing services, are problematic enough, but we also have to imagine what kind of a slippery slope this could lead to. If it is okay now to block or throttle access to competing services, what could that mean if internet service providers also have new services and would be blocking access to competing new services? What would that mean for access to information of all of our citizens? So this slippery slope has to be avoided as well. The questions we need to answer and the issues to deal with are not easy, but we hope that this morning's discussion will also give an indication of the way forward. We're not shying away from the difficult questions, and we have an excellent panel to help us with that. I'll introduce them later, but now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Sabine Verheyen, who will say a few words about it as well.
Thank you, Marietje. Distinguished speakers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to everyone here this morning, and thank you for joining us. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to have Vice President Kroes with us today, and I want to welcome her to this debate. I'm looking forward to her keynote speech and her ideas about further actions ensuring competition and the open internet in Europe. First, I would like to stress that I believe in the multi-stakeholder approach when it comes to internet governance and policy. The continued success of the information society depends on a full, equal and meaningful participation of all stakeholders involved, the private sector, civil society, alongside academic and technical community and the governments. After I had a brief exchange with Commissioner Kroes in the IMCO last week on various topics relating to the digital agenda, I would like to stress that I welcome the Commission's plans to take action to further the single market in telecommunications. However, it is at the same time very important to intensify the debate about the net neutrality, which I think is a crucial debate at the moment. As Member of Parliament, I'm committed to maintaining the open and neutral character of the Internet, and I'm convinced that a common EU approach on net neutrality issues is necessary to provide regulatory certainty for citizens, operators, and all the other stakeholders. Last year, Marietje and I were involved in drafting a Parliament resolution on the revision of the international telecommunication regulations. Back then, concerns were growing over proposals being presented by different states and on ITU level, which would impact the Internet's architecture, operations, content, security, business relations, Internet governance, and in some cases, the free flow of information online. Finally, the Parliament called on the EU member states to prevent any changes to the international telecommunication regulations which would be harmful to the openness of the Internet and net neutrality. In addition to the EP resolution, a study by the Body of European Regulators for Electronic Communication, BEREC, suggested that the strongly market-orientated traffic management of some internet service providers is potentially problematic, since blocking or slowing down content from online services may be to the commercial advantage of their own services and hinder others to develop and to grow. Given the latest developments in certain member states where telecoms announced data volume limits on flat rate internet, like in Germany, the debate over network neutrality has come home in a real way for millions of Europeans. Linked to this, I welcome today's discussion whether mandating net neutrality through regulation represents unnecessary rules for the internet, or if regulatory measures are required in order to preserve competition in the digital single market. We need to do both, empower end users to make informed choices and require telecom operators to be transparent about their traffic management and respect the principle of net neutrality. But now I stop at this point and I give the floor to Vice President Kroes. Thank you very much for being here and joining us in this debate.
Thank you so much for inviting me. You took an excellent initiative, time-wise, content-wise, and involving all those who are interested in the development of the future economy of Europe. And we are running out of time. You even more than me myself, so to say, but that is also an inspiring environment for then we are not wasting time, so to say, and we go for the result. And rightly mentioned, and I'm grateful for that, you are backing the initiatives and we are looking forward to a constructive and fruitful dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, net neutrality can be a polarizing debate, no doubt about that. We are aware of that. But I often find there is much we agree on. So that is also not a bad start to find out what is to be agreed upon and what needs to be discussed in depth. We anyhow agree that the internet is a great place to exercise and enjoy liberty. And by the way, in other places on the map, people are aware what it is talking about enjoying liberty of this phenomenon. A great place to innovate and implement new ideas without having asked for permission, and an open forum for all kinds of activity. And that is why people find the internet such an incredible place to explore and to experiment and to experience. And that is why there are so many great online services for all to enjoy. And I just this morning had a call of one of those fascinating guys in this, but it could have been a girl too, for thanks in this environment there is a balanced enjoying of the positive experiences. But if you are just listening to such a young entrepreneur, then it's giving hope for our recovery of the economy in Europe. So it is the reason, exactly the reason why people are prepared to pay for high quality connections and are disappointed if they don't deliver. And if the net neutrality debate shows anything, it is how important the internet has become. Not just basic broadband, but high quality connections that are open, that are fast, and that are enabling. Connectivity is at the heart of our innovative future, and people care about it deeply, and I'm aware of that. Openness, liberty are values I'm determined to defend everywhere and with anybody. And that is where I feel to be backed by the two girls on my side. This is indeed one of those issues that are really important. The weekend before last weekend, I had the privilege with Marietje together to visit Egypt. And being on the spot, it is absolutely an experience. Again, don't give up. And indeed, defend your values and defend what is at stake, so to say, in a democracy. In the Arab Spring, and we are recently faced with other spots on the map over in that area. The Arab Spring showed us the power of the internet. So I'm determined to support and champion the network. No doubt about that. And I feel comfortable with the two ladies, so to say, and not only them, but more in Parliament. A network that is open, is unified, is delivering the democratic values across the world, but especially talking about our own responsibilities here in Europe. And that is why we have our no disconnect strategy, helping global activists use ICT tools in their fight for freedom. By the way, I'm not always modest, but in this case I try to be modest, that we can't only look outside Europe, but that we also have to look inside Europe, for all otherwise our credibility is at stake. And that is why I am determined to safeguard media freedom, safeguard pluralism, including in the digital age. By the way, if someone is thinking that is a simple debate, then I'm not agreeing. It's not a simple debate. Even so, we agree on values, the debate is no less very complex. Take the public highway, another open network. You can get on wherever you want, explore and drive anywhere. Yet our roads aren't a lawless anarchy. They have traffic lights, they have speed limits, a highway code, nor on the other hand do we over-regulate. Governments don't tell you what kind of car to buy or where to drive to. So it is a nice, just example in which we can show you need a couple of rules, you need an attitude of following the rules, behaving, but there is freedom, so to say, in how you are using it in the way I just mentioned it. And however open it is, the road network doesn't come free of charge, for that is absolutely an essential element. Someone has to pay one way or another, whether through taxes or tolls. And my point isn't that the internet is like the road system. It isn't. They are different networks. I'm aware of that. I'm not naive. My point is that for any open network, finding the right balance, it's not obvious. And when to step in and set out rules, or when to hold back and let people make their own choices. The approach needs to follow not from ideology, but from an understanding of how that particular network actually operates. And then we can find the right way forward to preserve its benefits, project them into the future, and best protect users' interest. Finding that balance, by the way, is not the simplest way. Some like to imply that it is, but I have never believed in policy by slogan. That is not my cup of tea. Safeguarding the open internet in practice is too important a goal to trivialize or reduce to mere mottos. Just a couple of examples. The fact is, the online data explosion means networks are getting congested. Fact of life at the moment. Internet service providers need to invest in network capacity to meet the rising demand, and the right predictable regulatory framework will help them to do so. But at peak times, traffic management will continue to play a role. And indeed, it can be for legitimate and objective reasons, like separating time-critical traffic from the less urgent, and many ISPs already do manage traffic in that way, avoiding congestion and ensuring quality. Likewise, many ISPs protect their customers from spam, something which has made a real positive difference, which I'd say most users find helpful and are quite happy with. Plus, different users have different network needs. Some people want a straightforward mobile package to check the odd email or website. Others want to constantly watch videos on their tablet, consuming high bandwidth. Those different needs are all valid. It's not up to me to say what is yes or no. They're all valid. They are a reflection of the richness and diversity of the internet itself. And I want to put those consumer needs right at the center of our thinking. Operators need to respect those different needs, and to do that they must also be allowed to innovate those needs. Regulation matters. But while we, quite rightly, regulate chemicals and food or toys, we have largely left the internet intact. And that's precisely why it has been the source of so many new ideas. I'm aware of that. From cloud computing to crowdsourced knowledge, video on demand to virtual universities, etc., etc. Ideas no central planner could ever have foreseen or provided for in advance. Ideas which had space to grow precisely because no regulator tried to pick winners or to second-guess innovation. And that is a philosophy that should inspire. It's a success we should build on. And yet it's clear to me there are problems in today's internet. The 2011 study by the European regulators showed that for many Europeans, online services are blocked or degraded, often without their knowledge. For around 1 in 5 fixed lines and over 1 in 3 mobile users. It's obvious that this impacts consumers, but startups also suffer because they lack certainty about whether their new bright ideas will get a fair chance to compete in the market. Plus, many other Europeans aren't getting the speeds or quality they paid for. And that is a basic principle that applies in other consumer markets. It should apply to internet access too. In parallel, we are seeing the pressure for national action on net neutrality. And the telecom single market is far from complete. We are aware of that, and to put it in a diplomatic way. And a failure to take coordinated action on net neutrality would shatter the fragile construction. If we don't address net neutrality, wider problems will arise, and tomorrow's innovative services might have to stop at the border. I don't want to see that happen, not during my time in office. I don't want to see that happen, and I will soon be putting forward proposals, and Sabine was referring to it, to ensure it doesn't. And I know you are keen to learn the details. For me, an open platform is built on competition, innovation, transparency, and choice. And that is what our proposal will be built on too. Number 1, we should allow innovation. The new services round the corner depend not just on content, but on high-quality connections. For example, if you have just bought a video conferencing system, you will probably also want an internet service that guarantees the right quality end-to-end. If someone wants to pay extra for that, no EU rules should stand in their way. And it's not my job to ban people from buying those services, nor to prevent people providing them. And if you don't want to buy them, that's also fine. And you should absolutely continue to benefit from the best efforts internet. And second, we must ensure transparency. Before you sign up to an internet contract, you want to know key details. What's included, what's not, and in particular, what speed you shall actually get. Too often, those are hidden away in long and complex contracts. that's not good enough. We all deserve a clear promise before signing up and not a nasty surprise after. After all, when you buy a carton of milk or name it, you don't expect it to be half empty. And the same goes for the 50 megabit internet. And third, people need choice in their internet services. And a real choice, not a theoretical one. And if they want to switch providers, they should be able to do so without countless obstructions. And in practice, there are many barriers to switching, like excessive charges, modern hardware, or email addresses. And we will be looking at those barriers and removing them. In particular, there needs to be an end to annoying practices, like quietly extending a contract for another year without asking. It's time to put people back in the driving seat. And fourth, innovation also needs competition. Services like voice over IP or messaging services like Skype or WhatsApp offer real innovation for consumers. But some ISPs deliberately degrade those services or block them outright, simply to avoid the competition. In my view, such ideas are on their way out. Most consumers see the richness and vibrancy of the full, unlimited internet and wouldn't want anything less. So, to be honest, with genuine transparency, I doubt many consumers would care to buy such a limit product. I doubt many ISPs would dare to offer one. But equally, it's clear to me that many Europeans expect protection against some commercial tactics. And that is exactly the EU safeguard we will be providing. A safeguard for every European, on every device, on every network, a guarantee of access to the full and open internet without any blocking or throttling of competing services. And those are the proposals I will be putting forward to the College of Commissioners, and that's about delivering the best deal for citizens. Full stop. Ensuring they get the fairest deal, the most choice, the best new services over the fastest networks. So my proposal will do that, with new rights for every citizen and new obligations for every internet provider, to protect consumers without tying down their freedom of choice, and to maintain the incentives to upgrade to better infrastructure. My last line, to safeguard the open internet for every European and keep it for a platform for rich and vibrant content as a network at the heart of our economy, our society, and our connected continent. And I need the help of Parliament for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Kroes. I think this really sets the scene for our discussions, in which we'll try to dig deeper into some of these questions, and we'll make sure that the outcomes of our discussions reach you. They may be of help in your work with the college and your ambitions. We know you have to leave, but we very much appreciate your participation this morning. And there's also a letter of support that I was asked to offer you on behalf of a number of small, medium-sized enterprises, where they heard your call to be backed in the ambition of a single telecom market. And so if you could bring that, and then we'll continue with the panel shortly.
Thank you. Have a nice discussion. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I will go down now because, I will sit down.
So they don't have enough place on the panel for all the speakers. So do you want to say something else? Maybe that's nice. So even I will not sit in front here anymore. I will go down because the panel is so big and we have to discuss so many things. I will go down to the here in the room. So I just want to say, I think it was very important that Neelie Kroes started the new initiative now for the last year of the legislative period, because I think it's very important to have deeper impact in the discussion of the net neutrality and how to develop a real single market in Europe for telecommunications. This is the basis for growth, for development in the whole internet sector, and it's also very important for small and medium-sized enterprises to get an opportunity to develop and to come forward. And it's also a big challenge for us as Europeans not to be covered by just American companies and just American big internet providers and content systems. And I think we need an open market, really a single market, to be able to develop in the right way and to get to get that back what we invest in innovation and all these things. So I'm looking forward to the discussion how to bring together the telecom single market in Europe and the question for net neutrality and how we should interpret net neutrality, because what we heard, making the possibility of given the possibility of open and transparent ways of different kinds of services. Some people say that's not net neutrality anymore, but I think we should discuss this in a very frank and open way now on the panel during our discussions and the exchange we will have now on these issues, so that we get perhaps a few steps forward in the process of how can we deliver open and free services for all sides, and also fair regulations also for those who have to make their business in this environment. So I'm looking forward for the discussion, even I leave now here in front, and I thank Marietje for co-organizing. We take the initiative to do this discussion this morning and to invite all these people coming together and discuss about net neutrality, because I think that's a very important discussion we have to do in the next year.
Thank you very much. And we still have a very ambitious program ahead. What we're going to do now is start with two presentations by two distinguished speakers who will kick off the discussion by a panel. I'll just sit here to make sure that the discussion runs smoothly and that you can come in with your questions as well. But I would urge all the speakers to try to stick within time, because otherwise there's going to be a big congestion here on the stage as well. But let me begin by giving the floor to two speakers who will give this brief introduction, and then I'll introduce the panel later so it's fresher in your memory. We'll start with Professor Marsden, who is a professor of media law at the University of Sussex, and then Joe McNamee, who is the executive director of EDRI, European Digital Rights, and then we'll kick off the discussion. Thank you both, and we look forward to seeing and hearing from you.
Thank you, Chairs. Chris Marsden, there's a hashtag there on the first slide, NN in EP, and that is the Twitter hashtag for the event. If you go to that, you'll see that judgment's already been given, that we now work out that the Commissioner is opposed to net neutrality, and we'll have some details of that later on in the morning, I'm sure. I just want to make a couple of introductory remarks, because I was a little bit shocked by a couple of the things that were said. First of all, please understand there is no data explosion on the internet. Cisco's latest estimate is the fixed internet is growing year on year 21%. That is below its historic growth figure. Mobile internet, allegedly 68%. Cisco forecasts have always been exaggerated on that. They brought it down substantially. And in fact, before the European Parliament, Scott Marcus from VIC, the consultancy in Bonn, talked about the fact that there's so much handoff from mobile to fixed networks that actually that number's coming down very, very fast. So there is no data explosion on the European internet. So we shouldn't be trying to make policy based on a fallacious assumption. Okay, I thought that was quite useful to say to people first, because evidence-based policy making should actually involve evidence, and the evidence doesn't actually support that idea. Okay, so if we could take the next slide. Sorry, the academic is not supposed to be provocative like this, but net neutrality, 1999, that's why I say how soon is now. 99 is when this all started. I won't go over details, I've got lots of slides. The slides, by the way, are available. If you go to that hashtag NN in EP, you'll find the slides there. Next slide, please. This is Charlie Dunstan, who came to the Ofcom International Conference. Next slide, please. And he talked about the fact that Ofcom said there was no problem. And Charlie said, well, I keep getting hate mail, and in fact, I've had death threats about the fact that we're throttling content, traffic. This is in 2006. And yet, 2010, BEREC, trying to give evidence to the European Commission, Ofcom told them there wasn't a problem in England. They hadn't ever had a problem. What was the problem that we were talking about? Well, you know, with evidence gathering like that, it's no wonder it's taken so long for us to get to this point. Next slide, please. This is me, of course. If you haven't read the book, don't worry. The book's a Creative Commons download as well as a hardback copy. I don't care that much about the royalties, so get hold of it whichever way you like. But the book itself, of course, is old. Next slide, please. Because the book is actually almost as old as this declaration by the European Commission, the kind of parting present from Commissioner Reding to Commissioner Kroes, that said that we should be working towards net neutrality. We should be working to enshrine net neutrality as a regulatory principle pursued by NRAs. Next slide, please. So, Commissioner Kroes has talked about what she wants to do. She's talked about the fact that she wanted BEREC to do all the evidence gathering instead of the Commission itself. Only if that provides lots of evidence of infringement would she do anything about guidance, which is presumably something that will happen in the next few months, or perhaps is going before the college soon. And only then, she'd said previously, would she be ready to prohibit the blocking of lawful services. Well, maybe this is about to happen. So I actually said a couple of years ago, guidance 2013, regulatory action 2014, if ever. I was ambitious with 2014. I think we're looking further out than that, although no doubt others will have something to say about that. Next slide, please. So this is where we've got to so far. The Netherlands, of course, May of last year. Finland introduced net neutrality as part of its universal service commitment. I think that's something we should focus on as well, the universal service commitment. Next slide, please. I do have a little tool set. You can look at that separately. Next slide, please. Slovenia, of course, has now introduced its own net neutrality law. It's much stricter than the Netherlands law. In particular, it focuses on things like data caps and attempts by operators to evade net neutrality laws by, for instance, introducing compulsory bundles of content that you have to buy. There's no point in us being able to use WhatsApp if we have to buy all of the content first in terms of voice telephone calls, right? This is one of the problems in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. So what we really have happening in Europe, certainly judging by the Commissioner's speech, is basically the first element of two elements. What we're getting is net neutrality light, eventually. Net neutrality light means eventually stopping blocking and throttling in order to make sure that we can actually use our current connections. But in fact, what I'm going to talk to you about very briefly is net neutrality heavy. What happens on the fast lanes? You've heard the Commissioner basically say that she's happy with toll motorways. The idea that guaranteed end-to-end quality of service can be introduced, and if you don't want to pay for it, that's just fine. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Next slide, please. So as you know, we have the Champagne Internet suggestion, which was made recently. I'm not quite sure who mocked up these wonderful stamps, but thank you. Showing the different areas. Might be Jeremy, I think. Or, next slide, please. This is an initial set of results from Glasnost. That's an attempt to actually analyze and to give a snapshot of where we're having net neutrality infringements, which I think is quite useful. Next slide, please. But net neutrality light is actually what I would call Amazon net neutrality. This in the United States was introduced in 2006 as a concept. The idea is do what you like on the fast lanes, but just don't mess around with the slow lanes. That's the net neutrality light approach that I was talking about. Next slide, please. So we should also bear in mind, and the Commissioner talked a lot about, Egypt and openness and democracy and all these wonderful things. We should bear in mind that it's not just about blocking and filtering. That's the easy case. It's about what do we do with high-speed lanes. And our chair talked about the fact that Deutsche Telekom is, of course, now introducing a throttling for heavy users and data caps which appear to be set until 2017. This is exactly the focus that we should be looking at. I'm going to say something very briefly about what they're trying to do in the United States about this and what we should be trying to do in Europe. Because the net neutrality light part, that's easy. What's more interesting is the future of the internet. What happens as we upgrade our speeds? Oh, I think you've jumped ahead too. Yeah, so if you could just jump ahead one. Okay, so let's bear in mind this is what we're talking about. Some Canadian activists came up with this wonderful slide. We're interested in what happens with ISPs throttling our traffic and what they do with our traffic going forwards. Next slide, please. So, United States, 15 years and counting. We have a new chair about to be confirmed by the Senate. Still non-enforced, their net neutrality, but nevertheless they're trying to make some efforts in the background, specifically about implementation. And the Commissioner's right, these things are hard, but they're harder if you actually haven't done anything about them in the first place. So I'm going to make some suggestions for what we can do. Next slide. So this is the US report and order. Next slide. As you know, I'm a lawyer, so I have to give you the legal bit. This is the problem that we have with the court case in the United States. Just to say the court case is likely to be resolved in the summer. Well, I'm told by friends in Washington it already is summer. So we'll see when the case is actually finally resolved. In the autumn, we'll probably find out that the US FCC order cannot be enforced, and so we'll be back to square one in the US. But nevertheless, let's talk about the detail. Next slide, please. So the detail is about this. This is the high-speed lane problem, special or managed services. This is where your ISP says, this is no longer the internet. This is our guaranteed quality of service part. We're going to separate this out. In other words, you have the slow lane or the emergency lane. This is what we're going to charge for the higher speed lanes. And they've been trying to work out what to do about this. How do you define how this works? And they've done two things. Next slide, please. Self-regulation via a thing called BITAG, which is the Broadband Industry Technical Advisory Group. That's trying to advise the FCC on what to do about applications that may be infringing net neutrality. This has been now in operation for almost 3 years. Next slide. And the second thing is the Open Internet Advisory Committee of the FCC, which is looking specifically at this problem of what do you do about special or managed services. It's chaired by a Harvard professor. Vice chair is the person who set up the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force. So it's very, very technical. But it's exactly what we need in order to be able to define these problems. Because if you allow telecom lawyers to define what specialized or managed services are, they'll make it anything we can charge for and make money from, which is likely to leave us with basically a dirt road internet for consumers. Thank you. So the working assumptions they're using are actually to say, we think we should set a very high barrier to managed or specialized services. We don't think we should allow telcos to get away with defining them themselves. Now, BEREC has made a basic announcement about this. You need case studies to understand how this works in practice. And actually, of course, Deutsche Telekom is providing us with such case studies. Whenever you shove everything that's IPTV into specialized or managed services, you, of course, are creating a case study for us. So I think that it would be useful for the Parliament to examine what Deutsche Telekom is doing and decide whether what they're actually doing is just privatizing the internet by putting everything into, quote, specialized or managed services. Next slide, please. So this is some detail. I won't go over the detail with you. You have time to read the slides. Next slide. But they do give examples within the Open Internet Advisory Committee of what they think should not be allowed to be a specialized or managed service. And this is really important to us. Next slide, please. Just to say, this is, of course, going to grow and grow. It's interesting. I'm not suggesting the Commissioner would, but I think some national regulatory authorities hoped this problem would go away, that somehow net neutrality wouldn't be an issue. Of course, it continues to grow as an issue because we continue to have problems about telcos interfering with the free and open internet. So we had a recent conference. It's a conference called the International Conference on Internet Science, where we put together the technical people who are exactly the people who could help us to solve these problems, exactly the people who could give us some policy guidelines to work out what we need to do. And my suggestion is that the Commission and the Parliament should get together and make this happen. Because unless we have this implementation, we can make as many lovely speeches as we like, but we won't actually even begin to address the problems. And to return to what I said at the beginning, if we keep talking about data explosions, well, the thing that's going to explode is the heads of the technical people who know there isn't a data explosion. Next slide, please. And that's me. Just to say, I do have a blog which deals with net neutrality issues. Seems to be very well read in Brussels and Washington. And you can see some more of my, how should we put it, more provocative comments there. I also have several very long, boring books, which those of you can read if you want to fall asleep. Thank you.
Good. Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. I was asking myself the question: what do you say about net neutrality when you're speaking after Chris Marsden? And the answer is not very much, because there's nothing much left to say. I'd just like to make a few brief comments, therefore, before the discussion starts. Net neutrality is about interferences in traffic by internet companies. And this week, we have two anniversaries that I think are worth noting. Firstly, it's exactly a year, approximately, since the European Commission and the United States launched their global alliance against online child sexual abuse. And in the context of this initiative, they decided to promote a technology which has not been proven to be of any value at all for protecting children. And it involves filtering and monitoring of online activity voluntarily by internet companies. And during the launch event, Commissioner Malmström proudly announced that one of the countries that is going to be taking part in this lawless interference with their citizens' data traffic is Turkey. This is not good policy. The second interesting anniversary is that it's exactly 1 week since the Internal Market and Consumer Committee had a meeting. And during this meeting, they voted on two reports. They voted on the report on cloud computing, where they said that there should be net neutrality. This is a very good thing, and we thank them for this. They also voted on a report on online gambling, where they said that internet providers should follow best practice of blocking gambling websites. So in the same sitting, the Internal Market Committee voted for and against interferences in traffic by internet companies. This is depressing more than anything else. However, it still has to be voted in plenary, and I'm still hopeful that that will be overturned. So,
Next slide.
that's okay. That's okay. So I'd like to talk briefly about, first of all, mobile call termination, and the reason why will become clear in a moment. So, whenever I phone any of you, my phone company has to pay your phone company to receive the call. That's called a termination rate. Next slide. Now, whenever anybody, you can ask yourselves, whenever anybody chooses their mobile operator, they do so on the basis of how much it costs them to make phone calls. They never check how much it costs other people to phone them. And for this reason, mobile call termination has been an incredibly difficult problem to solve, because competition does not solve the mobile termination problem, because it's somebody else's cost that's involved and not their own. And even with a strong regulatory framework on this, and even with this regulatory framework being in position for over a decade, and again, we still have a situation where the European Commission finds it tremendously difficult to regulate an environment which is not capable of being addressed by competition alone. So why am I talking about this? Well, in the World conference on international telecommunications that Commissioner Reding mentioned, the European telcos had a proposal, which was that there should be a termination fee for internet traffic, which would mean that online services would have to pay to get access to the internet provider's customers. And being a little bit provocative, maybe it says a lot about the inventiveness of the telecoms sector, that they can't even invent a new problem. They have to recycle the problem that we've been suffering with for the last over a decade. Termination fees on the internet create a barrier to the market. Creating a barrier to the market disincentivizes innovation. This lack of innovation would disincentivize people from paying for better internet connections, because what's the point in paying for a better internet connection if the compelling services are not being launched anymore? It's a vicious circle as opposed to the virtuous circle of a neutral network. What we end up with is networks which are a road to nowhere. Now, it is the case in some aspects of our lives that things being scarce make them more enjoyable. But most of the time, networks are about mutual benefit. The online services make it more interesting for people to be online, and people being online makes it more interesting to invest, even though some internet service providers still don't understand this. The bottom line is that networks benefit from being networks, and if the services aren't online, if they're not open, if they're not generating innovation, then people will be less inclined to use them. An open online environment generates more innovation, more competition, and more freedom. And more innovation and competition generates more demand for internet access services. Now, what was interesting from Commissioner Kroes a little while ago was that she mentioned the fact that if you're trying to launch a new online service, it's important to know that the market is going to be there for you. What was also interesting is in the 4 points that she raised as solutions, not one of them addressed this problem. Safe business models based on guaranteed revenue from rich online services are bad for investment, and so in the long term, they're also bad for the access provider. Investment will be harmed unless net neutrality legislation saves access providers from themselves. So my message is that we should smile at the dinosaurs and not be afraid of the evolution of the internet. i.e., we should be the cute kid on that side, not the cute kid on this side. Thank you.
Thank you for those two thought-provoking introductions. I would just, as a side note, suggest that we try to make sure that knowledge and your experiences, that of experts, that of different stakeholders, feeds into this discussion in a constructive way, so that we can get the best results out of it. Let me start by introducing our panel, who can then give a response to the introductions, and then we'll turn to you for more interaction. I'll start with Malte Berman, who is the General Secretary of the European Game Developer Foundation, representing the European computer and video game industry. Next to him is Jean-Jacques Sahel, who is the Director of Government and Regulatory Affairs for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at Microsoft. And he started at Skype. Then to my right is James Waterworth, who is Vice President of CCIA, which is the Computer and Communications Industry Association. Then on my left is Jeremy Zimmerman, who, it says here, and I'm sure this is his official bio, is a hacker in the primary sense of a technology enthusiast who likes to understand it, not to be captured by it, and make it work better, not a criminal. And he's the founder of La Quadrature du Net, which is an advocacy group for digital rights and freedoms of citizens on the internet. And then next to him is Daniel Wilson, who is a senior policy advisor representing the BBC to the UK government and to regulators. He has a keen interest in digital access projects. So with that, I think we have an excellent panel. Maybe I'll just go in the order of introductions for first thoughts, and we'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me here. My name is Malte Beermann. I run the European Game Developer Federation, which is unfortunately not a foundation, but it's a federation which is an organization of SME associations all over Europe, basically organizations of game developers, independent companies who try to make computer games in Europe. So we are not necessarily an internet organization. We are more from the content side, and we are very deeply involved in trying to explain game development as part of a cultural debate, of a technology debate and economic debate. But we are, of course, let's say, in the very center of this net neutrality debate, because many of our game developers try or do publish over the internet and have been very successfully trying to touch directly to the end consumers over the internet. And this, what we call the digital shift, happened some years ago. Before that, computer games were, as you maybe recall, sold in stores. And then we had a very different value chain. So our value chain has changed, and that was actually, as we have observed, very much to the good of the European production side. Before I go into details, I just want to tell a very small story, because it's so, let's say, interesting. We have, of course, as an association, also a website. And this website was, believe it or not, for 6 months over the winter, blocked for people who work in the EU Commission. This is really absurd, because we are basically an association who tries to bring the issues of game development also to the people working in the Commission. And we were informed then by a researcher who works for the European Commission and who is somehow part of the EU Commission side, that he was not able to open our website because it was indicated to be games. And the EU Commission people are not supposed to play games during their work time. So somebody has indicated European Game Developer Federation's website as games. And so they couldn't access the website. This was actually during the evaluation period of the EU project. It was kind of an interesting situation. And actually, I think it's not funny. It's actually quite horrible that this kind of things happens. But I think this is a story which has to be told here, because it shows that net neutrality is also important for the government itself. It's also important that the information the European Commission is able to gather is actually free. And not free in the monetary sense, but free in the sense that the Commission can look wherever they want to look to, and actually they couldn't. So I think that's an interesting introductory story to understand. For us as game developers, and that's, I think, the most important thing, net neutrality is so important because we have many companies who started very small, and they just did a little game on the internet, and then they grew very fast. So, for example, we have in Germany, I'm a German national, this company in Bamberg who did the game Wurzelimperium, which is a very, very big game in Germany, browser game. They just had a dry cleaner, and they in the evening they programmed this game, and at some point they started to take money for it. It became bigger and bigger, and then they just sold their dry cleaning shop and became a really big company. And that is very often happening in the games industry, that actually the innovation comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from the big universities or the research foundations or somewhere else. It comes just from the grassroots. And this is so important, that these kind of people, they can publish their games through the internet, that they are not blocked from some intermediary street toll. I have another minute. Street toll telecom or similar gatekeeper, but that we are so happy that we have lost these gatekeepers because let's say a generation earlier, when we didn't have the internet yet, when games were still sold in shops, then we had actually the gatekeepers. This was the situation where actually we had large publishing companies who actually took the big part of the profits and basically left the leftovers to the developers and basically controlled the market in their way through the shops. And the fact that this is not the case anymore, that today we have an open marketplace where every game developer can basically start to offer its games to the end consumers, made also the European side much stronger. When we go to the details, I think we have to understand the interests of the telecom industry to get somehow financed the level of infrastructure we have in Europe. I think that is an important point. But this important point cannot be taken against net neutrality. I think we need to see how we do these things differently than through taking some kind of tolls on the highways. The worst point, and this is maybe is my last point in this little statement, is the risk of abuse. At the end of the day, it comes down to trust. Do we trust the telcos? Do we trust the people who own the networks that they will actually use the exceptions from net neutrality they are given, maybe for child pornography or questions like that, only for these cases, or also for their own economic benefit? And my experience is actually that you can trust small companies where you have individuals taking care of the responsibility, but when the organizations became so big that you don't have this anymore, then you cannot just trust it. You need actually a regulatory barrier to make sure that this is happening. And that is, I think, something where we need to take care of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you tapped on a very important point, which is this question of investment in infrastructure. It's always brought up when the discussion around net neutrality is held, so I would like to urge everyone, if you have thoughts, to bring those forward, because I think if we can find some answers or ideas about that, how it works in practice, what is needed, it would move the discussion a lot further, and we could even come with concrete recommendations. So please go ahead, and we have, if we want the audience to have a role as well, which I would like to, then we have about 15 minutes for the four of you. So I hope that works out.
Okay. So I had some notes prepared, but I think I'll just tell you a bit of history. It's kind of personal history of net neutrality over the past 10 or so years. Before I came to work for the private sector, I was a policymaker in a government not far from here, just across the channel. And I worked with, at the time, more than 10 years ago, there was something called the Office of the E-Envoy, and their role was to promote the take-up of the internet in the UK and the development of broadband, and that relates to infrastructure. And there's a great diagram that they put together in 2001, which basically showed a virtuous cycle at work. It started with compelling content and services. If you have compelling online content and services, you will encourage consumers to want to subscribe to internet access, and better, to move up from dial-up internet access to broadband internet access. Once you've moved up and invested, got that return on investment thanks to that consumer demand for broadband networks, you'll have better networks that will give lots of opportunities for the content providers to come up with new, compelling applications and services, which again will encourage consumers to upgrade to better broadband, etc. That virtuous cycle still exists today. I think that's the key point about the infrastructure. We will not get any return on investment on fiber and new mobile infrastructure if we don't have a continued flurry of innovations and compelling content, applications and services that people want to access and therefore will want to have ever better, faster connections for. There is no point in having a cable arriving at your home or a satellite dish on top of your roof if it's not for the content and the services that run on top of those. We do not pay, as Europeans, 30, 40, 50 euros a month for just having a cable arriving at our house. Okay? It's for that content and those services. And we do not get royalties from the network operators for all that great content we produce that makes them money. Just by the by. So, continuing with the history, then when I remember doing a study tour in the US where in 2006, I heard a lot about net neutrality, and I came back to Europe, and I thought, I really need to update my minister on this. And I did a briefing on net neutrality, researched the issue. I had been told by a UK mobile operator who was at the same conference in the US, but don't worry, it's a US problem. I thought, no, I really need to look at this. In policy, you start with evidence. So I did a research, asked my regulator. My regulator came back and said, don't worry, there's no problem in the market, and in any case, if there is a problem, we have competition powers, we can sort it out. Okay, that's the advice I gave, but saying, we should continue to monitor the situation. Fast forward 2 years, I switched to the private sector because I was very interested to work for a European internet success story, Skype, and pretty much as soon as I arrived, I was told, well, can you please have a look at net neutrality? We're very active on it in the US, but we haven't really looked at it in Europe. So I did my fact-finding, my evidence gathering, and I started doing a really exciting job, which was to look at the terms and conditions of offers by ISPs, both mobile and fixed. And what did I find? You can't use Skype, or at the time certainly, you couldn't use Skype or VoIP on any mobile operator in Germany, France, Italy, Spain. In the UK, you could do it on only one mobile operator, and that happened to be the one we had a partnership with, and the list went on. That was the sort of evidence we gathered at the time. So then, play that into the negotiations for the telecom package, where the European Commission had actually come up with a pretty decent proposal initially, which said that national regulators should protect end users' ability to access the content of their choice. Now, fast forward a couple of years, finished the telecom package. Text is not that great, but we've got legislation in place which has got protections on net neutrality. Yet, still, up to recently, up to actually last week, I still have people say we have no problem of net neutrality in Europe. Now, luckily, we have formal official evidence from the regulators that shows that 50% of mobile users in Europe are potentially affected by restrictions. This is not a small number. This is a systemic market failure. And transparency, informing consumers, which we've had now for 3 years on a telecom package, hasn't worked. Competition law doesn't work because you need to have either collusion or significant market power by an ISP in order to sort it out. So we need a bit more. Luckily, we have good examples. The Dutch and the Slovenians have actually transposed European law, the telecom package, properly, I think. They don't have a net neutrality law. They have net neutrality protections as part of their implementation of the telecom package. So what I'm saying is we don't need new legislation on net neutrality. We've got a basis of it at EU level. Now what we need is a very clear recommendation from the European Commission that explains to other member states how to do like the Dutch and the Slovenes have done and properly protect net neutrality in the laws or in the application of the telecom laws. And so, in short, there should be no discrimination between internet traffic flows that is anti-competitive or that creates barriers to innovation or harms end users. Unrestricted internet access should be the norm. Internet access is always unrestricted, otherwise it's not the internet. And yes, of course, we should have managed services which should allow that to flourish. Possibly we could have a forum, like in the US, to discuss new proposals, to make sure that indeed the internet doesn't become a dirt road next to managed services. But I think we've got very clear ways forward. We've got a lot of regulatory best practice from a lot of countries around Europe that all resembles each other. We just need those very same principles that we see in France, in the Netherlands, in Slovenia, in Norway, in Finland, etc., applied throughout Europe. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is James Waterworth. I run the Brussels office of the trade association Marietje described, the CCIA, which in short represents internet companies. We have offices in Brussels, Geneva and Washington. And given that we represent the economic aspect of this, most of our companies provide services over the top, I'm going to start with a few figures. First of all, mobile subscriptions in Europe. The GSMA says that in 2011 there were 656 million subscriptions in Europe. That's more than one per person, you will have noticed. BEREC says that 36% of mobile subscriptions in Europe have peer-to-peer connections throttled or blocked. It may not have escaped your notice that Skype is a peer-to-peer connection. So what's the total number of mobile subscriptions in Europe that cannot use Skype or similar VoIP services? 236 million. 236 million mobile subscriptions in Europe that, according to BEREC, cannot use Skype. I think that is a significant problem that probably needs to be dealt with. But worryingly, it could get worse. Here's why. I was asking Jean-Jacques this morning, what's the size of the VoIP market measured in euros? Well, it's single billions, I think. It's when you compare it to the media market or to the provision of cloud services, it is much smaller. So we've seen a couple of other problems recently. The new model being introduced by Deutsche Telekom has been alluded to by others. And I think Daniel will probably know what the correct figure is for the size of the media market in Europe, but I'm guessing it's around 100 billion pounds or euros. You can maybe correct me later. And clearly, were we to see discriminatory practices in the media market, the economic impact would be considerably greater than the economic impact we see with VoIP services. Equally, cloud computing. Some of you may be aware that France Telecom has introduced a number of packages which include data caps, which are not applied if you use France Telecom's own cloud services, but which do apply if you use competing cloud services. The European Commission's cloud strategy from 2012 puts the value of cloud computing services in Europe at 45 billion euros directly, and with a GDP impact of 957 billion euros. I imagine, although I don't know, that this is probably growing pretty quickly. So what would be the impact of distortions in this market? Clearly, economically, and clearly in terms of our productivity, very significant. One thing it's important to point out is because cloud services, like many other, depend on network effects, transparency is something which will simply not work. Let me explain why. If you are the chief information officer of a company who may have employees, a sales force, for example, who move around. Sometimes they're in their office, sometimes they're at home, sometimes they're at different customers' offices. They may go between 5, 10, 20 sites, possibly in different countries. If you want to deploy a productivity suite, whether it's Microsoft, whether it's Dropbox, whether it's Google, whatever it is, some kind of productivity suite, you would have to know which productivity suites can or cannot be used on all the different connections that your workforce will travel to. And clearly that's an impossible matrix for any CIO to know. Namely, we have a much more serious problem potentially in cloud services. So what does this mean in terms of what are reasonable practices? Well, let me state that I think it's extremely important that telecoms firms are able to offer their own managed and specialized services. This type of competition is absolutely something that they should and can be entering into. The question is if upon doing so they engage in discriminatory practices. I think that we need in Europe a flexible rule that ensures non-discrimination or the open internet, and one that will stand the test of time, namely whatever discriminatory practices we may see today, whether through traffic management or whether through pricing or whether through other, will inevitably evolve over the coming years. So we need to have a rule that will stand the test of time. And importantly, it needs to deal with the problem of ISPs looking not just at what traffic is passing through the network, but whose traffic is passing through the network. Finally, investment, the point Marietje just made. We absolutely believe that the open internet is an internet which will encourage the kind of innovation that Martin referred to, which will cause new high bandwidth services and applications to be developed, which will cause consumers to upgrade from whatever connections they have today to faster, fatter pipes, which they will possibly pay more for. And it's absolutely appropriate in our mind that telecoms companies should be able to charge customers more for accessing higher capacity connections. We see that as an extremely virtuous model which will underpin the investment in high-speed networks for telecoms firms. Finally, plurality of services equals a plurality of views. So provided we have an open internet and plenty of competition between services, we will also have a plurality of opinions, which is extremely important for our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here and also very proud to be part of this very select club of organizations which websites have been blocked. Our website, laquadrature.net, have been blocked by Orange in the UK as part of a package to protect the children, believe it or not, which is a very good example of what happens when we let too much power in the hands of these intermediaries. We've been working on the issue of net neutrality since we've been founded as La Quadrature du Net in 2008 and intervened in the debates around the telecoms package quite a lot. And since then, I have this sad impression that not much changed. It's been 5 years. At the time, we saw AT&T of America, who didn't and still doesn't, I think, operate a network here in the EU, was one of the strongest lobbyists against net neutrality in the EP. And at the time, the arguments that market will solve it all, that transparency will be enough for consumers, that consumers could vote with their feet, were very fashionable arguments. Well, they still are today. We perceive that the issue of net neutrality is making its way through various layers of society. Of course, there are those positive examples all around Europe of legislation towards net neutrality. But what about the EU? What about the institutions here? In essence, I think that the key aspect of what a free, open, therefore neutral internet brings to our society is this universality of potentiality of participation. It's not only about access, it's not only about commenting on blogs, it is really about this read and write ability to everything that is universally on the internet. This universality of participation is what is still in our hands today and what is our responsibility to protect. And I really think that in all humility, in all modesty, we are just beginning to understand the consequences on our society, on our economy, on our culture, of this universal capacity of participation. This is why it is crucial that we think here with a perspective. What we know for sure, and we can pick examples about the Arab Spring or whatever, or WikiLeaks for that matter. What we know for sure is that when we speak of this participation, we speak at the same time of freedom of speech and of innovation. It is impossible to make a difference between the two, because my right and ability to post something on a blog is the very same of my right and ability to post a new piece of software on some server and deploy a new innovative service. So our position is that if it concerns freedom of speech, then it is paramount. It is enough for the legislature to take the issue and enforce it through law. But then we also have the economic arguments, which would help in this House to reach a consensus and to speak to a wide majority of members. Well, we need to take on those economic aspects, and we need to look at the facts. Everything is on the table. We have all the data, whether it's from BEREC, whether it's from national regulators, whether it's from our own platform called respectmynet.eu, where we collected data from citizens about more than 170 contracts in the EU, which have discrimination. We need to talk about those market arguments, because the market approach about competition and transparency will solve it all failed. It is clear by now, from BEREC study, from our own respectmynet study to today, nothing changed. We still have an immense part of population of the EU that for geographical or economical or historical reason has access only to one operator. How would they vote? With their feet? So when we hear Nelly Cruz say that it might be legitimate for reasons of congestion to discriminate at peak times, the time-critical application on the internet, it makes me feel like shouting, because this is exactly what we hear from Telefonica and the such for years and years and years. There is no such thing as time-critical application on the internet. or else it's not an internet application. Because if you send data on the internet, you take the assumption that you cannot know how long it will take. This is how the internet works. So this discrimination at peak time makes no sense. But for the telecoms operator to justify an investment model that will be based on something else than growing the common infrastructure. And that's my point here. What we expect from telecom operators, what we would impose to telecom operators if we had such a thing as an industrial policy, would be that when there is not enough bandwidth, they invest in more bandwidth, period. We pay them to grow the common infrastructure. That's their business model. That's our service. That's what we pay for. And if they claim that there might be a good reason to do something else, then it's all concern. It's all concern for us all. And I hear speaking about transparency for so many years. And here is something you can do as a legislator. Bring transparency on the cost of the offers. Bring transparency on the cost of the bandwidth. Oh, so many congestion, so much bandwidth increase, and blah, 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 and we need to invest. Oh, la, 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 la. But look at the facts. Look at the cost of bandwidth. Look how much the cost is dropping proportionally to the increase of use. This is data that you can get as a policymaker, and this is transparency that is worth fighting for. So in the end, inaction here plays the game of discrimination. I'm all ready to acknowledge that Neelie Kroes will now do something about it. It's been 4 years that we hear her going from that side of the speeches to the side of the telecoms operator who want to provide great new offers for cheap where only email access will be available. But we need more than speeches. We need concrete action because the internet as a universal sphere of participation is more than just copper. That, by the way, was paid by taxpayers. It's more than just copper. It's more than just fiber. The internet as a whole, as a concept, is a common good. It means that it belongs to every one of us. But it also means that we have a shared responsibility over it. And this is precisely what it is about. And this is precisely what you in this house can do about it. We have to put pressure on Neelie Kroes, so we have more than speeches, so we have concrete actions. I don't need to remind you that we are about to enter an electoral period. This is a crucial issue which would get much support from citizens and civil society. But once again, let's go beyond speeches and let's take action. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start by talking, I want to talk today about why the internet matters to the BBC and how much it matters, and then turn briefly to our thoughts on how net neutrality can be protected. We've heard a bit about the Arab Spring today. I won't focus on that as my example, but turn instead to the Olympics, which some people in the UK may have heard rather a lot about from the BBC in the past 9 months. The reason I want to talk about the Olympics is because it demonstrated just how important internet distribution is to us. It extended the choice, which had previously been restricted to what we could show on our main channels. It enabled us to show every single event as it was screened and as it happened live, 24 different streams. And it also allowed audiences to catch up on iPlayer, which incidentally our catch-up television service, which was throttled some time ago. Our coverage also enabled mobility via IP, and that was absolutely crucial, particularly at weekends. So it's a really important part for broadcasters in innovating online, and net neutrality is a crucial aspect of that. But I just wanted to turn to Chris's point about there being no data explosion on the internet, because what the Olympics showed us was that the overwhelming driver of access to our content was broadcasting. It was live television on television screens. And while traffic and the growth in IP has been substantial online, linear still predominates. Second thought on the need for data. What we've also seen increasingly is that requests to our catch-up services come not via 3G, but via Wi-Fi networks. So over 90% of traffic, 90% of requests to catch up on BBC services on the iOS operating system, mobile operating system, comes from Wi-Fi networks, not 3G. I think that's worth reflecting on as policymakers leap from discussions of the 700 megahertz band towards the whole wider UHF. There are calls to question the growth in demand there. But overall, both platforms clearly matter to us a great deal, and increasingly so. And we are innovating not just on the new platforms, but also on traditional platforms. The internet and safeguarding net neutrality is not just important to us. We've commissioned a substantial report a few years ago by Plum Consulting, which looked at the social and economic value of maintaining net neutrality, which focused really on two things. I suppose the importance that there is no permission required to innovate, and secondly, this issue which has come up a lot on the panel about the economics of content and applications driving demand and encouraging investment in broadband networks. So I'll turn briefly now to how net neutrality is safeguarded, bearing in mind that context of the importance of net neutrality to the BBC, having suffered throttling like others. But I suppose my starting point would be that we welcome the progress by the Commission, and particularly the political dimension brought to net neutrality by the European Parliament. It provides really useful starting powers, and clearly not all of them have been implemented yet. We'll wait the details of Vice President Cruz's proposal, so I won't comment on those now. But what I would say on the future regulatory framework is that we don't think transparency is enough, nor either is fair use of marketing terms. And we've had many reasons for that already. I suppose an additional one is that the switching costs are simply not non-existent. There are significant switching costs and hassle in consumers changing from one ISP or mobile operator to another, and with bundling that's becoming increasingly so. So what can we do? Well, stopping blocking on the basis of commercial rivalry will be crucial, but it's something we've already got in the UK as the result of a self-regulatory code among the ISPs. There are other important things which are in that self-regulatory code. For instance, it states very clearly that signatories will make sure that full internet access is the norm among the packages that they offer. But clearly that isn't enough either, and it'll be very important to see, first of all, how implementation is monitored, but also to show clear political signals that the current situation needs to, and net neutrality is a political priority. So two areas might be helpful there. The first is highlighting the quality of service, minimum quality of service provisions which are available to all regulators. They've not been implemented in the UK. The case is not there for them to be implemented, but there should be a clear signal sent to ISPs that should the open internet degrade, those may need to be used. And the second is looking at whether there is potential for further regulatory measures. The UK regulator Ofcom, when looking at net neutrality, suggested that if, and only if, the open internet, the best efforts internet, degraded, then policymakers may need to consider whether public service content of all sorts, whether government services, public service broadcasters, or other public services, might need some kind of guarantee. That's not the world we want to see, but it is the sort of proposal that regulators are coming up with in the face of the threat of the open internet being degraded. So with that political signal, I think we can go some way. I'll just close by turning to the wider social benefits of the internet. You may remember from the opening ceremony of the Olympics, after all the nurses, the Industrial Revolution, I think we'd had Shakespeare, you had a rather genteel man in a house who popped up from nowhere. That was Tim Berners-Lee, and he had this to say on net neutrality. It's important to protect net neutrality so I can continue to innovate. And I suppose my final point is that for services like the BBC with our catch-up service, the most popular catch-up service in the UK, we don't expect our service to be throttled. The bigger issue is for innovation among innovators like Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of your remarks. I think there's a few clear key points which we can come back to, but looking at the time and looking at the panel, we knew this was going to be a challenge. But what I want to do is look how many questions there are in the room, take one round of a couple of questions. We potentially could not take all, and then I'll go to the introductory speakers to give their last comments on that, because then we're going to move to the second panel of this morning. So how many questions? Could you just all who have a question raise your hands? Only two? Okay, that's doable. Go ahead.
Yes, Luigi Gambardella. Now, I have just one question from Jeremy. Unfortunately, I arrived a little bit late and was not able to follow his entire presentation. I would ask this. The first question, how much do you pay for your broadband subscription? How much does it cost to you? And whether do you have experienced any restriction in the service that you have? And whether do you have choice in your country? Whether you can choose, if you don't like one provider, you can decide to switch to another one. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yep. Did you have a question?
It's not actually a question.
Oh.
As a simple citizen, I'm here in no official capacity. I would like to express a civilian point of view. I don't know if this is the appropriate time for that.
Yes.
It would take 2 to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm a bit worried when I hear us called consumers. It seems to be the only term I've heard for common people, consumers. And we're not just consumers, and we are not more consumers than any of you here. We are all potentially speakers and creators too. I think in the internet the distinction between a creator and a consumer is fading. And as a photographer and musician, I think that the distinction between an amateur creator and a professional creator would not be fair. It creates a barrier that hinders initiatives and enterprise, personal projects, so to say. Me, for example, my own website, I've heard talks about my consumer right to access some services, but I'd like to stress my rights to have my content accessible by the public and the audience, and my right to communicate with other people. I'll give you a few very short examples. I have many friends earning the minimal revenue, which is not much. They don't have quality internet connections because it's too expensive, or they don't have internet connections at all, and they have to go out and find a computer. I cannot communicate with them as freely as I do with people with more means, which I think is not fair and is a problem in the scope of freedom of speech. Another example is, well, I have a rather nomadic kind of life, and the quality of the mobile internet is debatable, and worse, I think, is the prices are prohibitive, mostly abroad. But I don't think that quality. I'm not asking for better quality. We're not asking for better quality. I think the quality should be the same for everyone. So I think that I've heard here two things, and I will conclude with that. That worrisome is that a quality of connection that depends on the price you pay is not fair to people. It confirms the gap that there's always been to access to many aspects of society between people with lesser means and people with better means, and I think that is important. And also, of course, there's the matter of priority on traffic, and who is to decide which traffic, whose discussion is more important than another one. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to Jeremy, who got a question, and Mart, who wanted to come in himself, I just wanted to respond to your comment about being identified as a consumer, because I appreciate that that there is a distinction. Internet users could be a better term as well. Some of this is caused by sort of political language that guarantees, protection of consumers, or that trickles down the economic impact to the individual, let's say. I think sometimes, that has to be prevented, but it also can serve a purpose to get on board more people to care about an issue. And so I think that there's sometimes also a strategic reason for people using certain words, because there's a sensitivity for the interest of so many people who are consumers in our societies, who can together create a critical mass and get a movement behind an issue. And that's something I wanted to highlight anyway. I've been looking at net neutrality for a long time, along with some colleagues, but certainly not everybody in the European Parliament or in the political leadership of the EU is aware of the importance that internet users, creators, consumers, small and medium-sized enterprises, and also businesses sometimes attach to it. And I think there has to be some kind of a market approach as well to create a demand for change. And that can only come from the bottom up. Political leadership is important. It's been identified that it's not going fast enough. I agree with that. And the best solution we can create all together is to join voices, come up with information and examples of how it works, and to create a demand for change together, and a demand for political action, which will go against some incumbents' and vested interests. And that's what makes it difficult, because they are also stakeholders, whether we like it or not. So I just wanted to give that as a little bit of context. Then I'll go to Jeremy, Malte, and then the two introductory speakers, and then we have to end this panel. I'm really sorry. Hopefully after the second panel, which perhaps will be moderated more tightly, let's hope, there will be more time for discussion for everybody.
Thank you, Marietje. There's nothing to be ashamed of with your moderation. Dear Luigi, it's a pleasure to meet you after those tweet clashes. I pay 30 euros for my internet access, which is actually restricted. YouTube is being throttled by Free in France. There are suspicions that BitTorrent is also being throttled in times of congestion, but this is something very difficult for us to demonstrate. I'm being restricted with my internet connection, and most of the landline internet access in France are, and most of the mobile internet access are. For the price, well, Iliad, the mother company from my service provider, has now record capitalization on the market. So I guess they're not losing money when selling me this internet access. Switching to another operator, yes, I could, but, well, all of them are restricted in my area at the moment. But the question is not for me. I use a VPN, so I always have free internet, because I'm a hacker, I know a bit of how the internet works, and I will always have access to free internet, even if it means doing expensive or very nasty things. But I'm not fighting for net neutrality for myself. I'm fighting for my mom, and I'm fighting for the universality of access. And I know people in remote rural areas of France who have only access to France Telecom, Orange, What would you tell them? Then now let me ask you a question that you may maybe answer on your panel. On my 30 euros a month, what is the price of the bandwidth? What if I use 30 megabits per second, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? How much would that cost? My guess is that it's under 5% of those 30 euros, because I know that the cost of the access lies in the last mile, breaking the pavement, fixing the copper or the fiber, bringing it up to my home, answering my calls when things don't work, and so on and so on. This is where the costs lie. So would you please tell us how much costs the bandwidth? And if in the end it means that for using a full unrestricted access, I would need to pay not 30 euros, but 30.50 or 31, I would be glad to do it.
Thank you. I think that one interesting observation concerning the definition of end consumers is that we have this very famous company in Europe which made this mobile game Angry Birds called Rovio, and they call the end consumers the fans. So there are no end consumers anymore, they're only fans. I think this is a very good solution to that. But that's not the reason why I wanted to speak up again. I think one of the important things is here is the combination between technical pretext and regulatory reality. And there's just one very concrete example I wanted to bring on the table from the games industry. There was a game called Age of Conan, which came out from Norway some years ago. I actually tried to challenge World of Warcraft. And when it came out, Deutsche Telekom just blocked the gateway to Norway because it was too much traffic. So they just said, well, all the traffic coming from Norway that day, it's basically Age of Conan. And then actually Age of Conan was not so successful, and we were not able to challenge World of Warcraft as Europeans. So we basically made our own mess. And that is, I think, one of a good example how this actually very concretely leads also to problems we shouldn't have. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just reminded that if in the game of politics we would even think of calling citizens fans, we would have big problems. Go ahead.
So just three very quick responses. I mean, first of all, you know, the European jargon is that you're a prosumer, but that doesn't really get the citizenship aspect, so a prosumer citizen. And actually my new book, the final chapter, talks about the fact that we need in Europe prosumer law, a law to give rights to prosumers, producers and consumers and citizens. And then just two things. First of all, just to say, of course, when I talked about the fact we haven't got a data explosion overall on the internet, I'm not giving you my statistics, I'm giving you Cisco statistics. They sell boxes. Their incentive is to exaggerate the traffic. I'm not suggesting they are, but they don't have any incentive to underplay the amount of traffic. So, you know, please let's treat these statistics as being a useful estimate, particularly given that otherwise you have to trust the ISPs. And then just a final thing, because it will probably surprise the chair to know that I'm actually not in favour of net neutrality. My proposal for, not for net neutrality light, I think we should have net neutrality light, but my proposal for faster speeds on the internet is actually exactly what James has suggested. It's for common carriage. And when the Commissioner said, well, it's very difficult and we don't know what principles we should have, we know exactly what principles we should have for open networks. From the roads to ferry boats to commercial shipping to telegraph to railways to telecoms, we have always had the principle of common carriage on public networks. And that doesn't mean that everything is carried at exactly the same price. What it says is you can't discriminate. You can't discriminate between two suppliers wanting the same thing. So if I want to carry video on a high-speed, quality of service guaranteed network alongside Daniel, I would pay the same as Daniel pays. I'd pay more than someone who just wants to carry email, but obviously I would pay the same, and that's fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory treatment. That, by the way, isn't common carriage. That, by the way, isn't net neutrality. But that's the proposal, and that would entitle telcos to charge higher prices for higher speeds. So that's the way to cope with the investment problem. So I don't differ from James in that. But let's just add, voice over IP, that is not a high bandwidth service. That's a very low bandwidth service. When that's being blocked, That's got nothing to do with investment in new networks.
On the consumer point, I think it's important because a lot of what the internet is used for is exercising our rights as citizens. And if you take the blocking of Jeremy's website, and really it's about time somebody blocked our website too. If you look at the example of La Quadrature's website being blocked, read Commissioner Cruz's speech and find a grain of hope that what she's proposing would stop that. I've been looking through it, I can't find it. So the network will remain not neutral. With regard to how much the internet access costs from Luigi, the internet providers are commercial entities. We provide demand, you set the price, and we pay it. I don't understand the problem. As regards restrictions, in Belgium, the Gaming Commission entered into an informal arrangement with the internet companies to block gambling websites abroad. Gambling companies and monopolies in countries like Belgium and France suffer from competition from countries like Ireland and the UK, where the return on gambling is much higher than it is in Belgium and France. And therefore, blocking is introduced in order to restrict consumer choice and restrict the market. As I said, the Internal Market and Consumer Committee describes this as best practice, which is a matter of some mystery to me. Do I have choice if I'm not happy? Well, I kind of do and I kind of don't. I've got a bundle service, which is difficult to move. And also, all of the operators carry out this blocking, so I'm not sure, unless I move myself to another country, I'm not sure what choice I have to change providers.
Thank you very much for all of your comments. I think the last comments about blocking also should pose a new question, regardless of net neutrality alone. What kind of redress mechanisms exist? To whom can you complain? What are the potential consequences for illegitimate blocking, etc., etc.? I think that would be great to just address in and of itself, because it kind of relates to net neutrality, but it's important in other contexts as well. I'm going to close the first panel. We'll do a very rapid switch of chairs and continue, so don't move. We'll be right back.
This panel, according to the program, will explore the positive and negative consequences of regulating net neutrality at European level. What are the pros and the cons from a human rights and consumer rights perspective of the new legislations versus the status quo? Can the protection of neutrality in law benefit citizens and business alike? Will a failure to protect network neutrality in Europe hurt competition and innovation, and by extension the digital market? We will have two introductory remarks by Regan MacDonald of Access, and by Christoph Steck, Director of Public Policy for Telefonica. Discussants are Guglielmo Beltrà, Legal Officer of the European Consumer Organization, the BEUC, Lee Hibbard, Media Information Society Division of the Council of Europe, Luigi Gambardella, who already took the floor in the previous panel, Amelia Andersdotter, Member of the European Parliament for the Greens European Free Alliance. May I? I'm actually substituting Lee Hibbard. Okay, Luca Belli. So is replacing Lee Hibbard. Lee Hibbard. Luca Belli, I just explained it, but in the list was not the case. So may I just opening this debate by recalling that Vice President Kroes announced that the European Commission will promote innovation, transparency, choice, competition, protection. In a sentence, she announced that the incoming European Commission measure will bring new rights to EU citizens as well as new obligation for the internet service provider. These statements are quite promising, even if they will require that the Commission will adopt measures which will strike the balance between economic freedoms and fundamental rights. Needless to say, internal market is the space to promote for economic freedoms, which not always complies with the principle of equality, non-discrimination, and fundamental rights. However, economic freedoms and fundamental rights are not opposite, notably in a social economy perspective, as the European Union should be following Article 2 and 3 of the Treaty of European Union. Sometimes, the overriding role of fundamental rights has been stressed by the European judges. Let's recall the Omega jurisprudence. But this has also been the case for the EU legislator. See the case of Directive 95/46, which was aimed to make possible to share personal data, and which is till now the Bible of protection of personal data. This need to enshrine a fundamental rights dimension in every EU policy is even more compelling after the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty and of the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is now binding at least as any other treaty article, such as Article 114, which is the basis for the internal market policies. Fundamental rights should then be enshrined and promoted and not only protected. Moreover, the Charter preamble announced a Copernican revolution in EU policies by stating that the European Union should place the individual at the heart of its activities by establishing the citizenship of the Union and by creating an area of freedom, security and justice. Moreover, Article 9 of the Treaty of the European Union, first statement, says that in all its activities the Union shall observe the principle of the equality of its citizens, who shall receive equal attention from its institutions, bodies, offices and agencies. Maybe this could be a sort of rhetorical statement for member states' governments who are accountable to their national citizens following the national election, but could be much more serious for members of the European Parliament who represent all EU citizens, no matter of their nationality. The importance of fundamental rights dimension when debating of the Internet is linked to the fact that this has become an essential tool to promote the informational self-determination, which is the importance for the individual as well for a vibrant democracy. So after this opening statement, I think that I can give the floor to the first intervention. So, Mrs. Reagan.
Yes, thank you, Emilio. And thanks for that introduction. I think one of the things that you said was very important, especially under EU law and the Charter. It's not only just about protecting human rights, but about the promotion of human rights, and that's especially important in the online environment. So today I want to talk about why the EU needs to enshrine net neutrality into law now. But first, just a few words on access, in case you don't know who we are. We're an international organization that defends and extends the digital rights of users around the world. We were founded in the wake of the Green Revolution, or the Green Movement, which was the re-election of Ahmadinejad in Iran, where citizen protests exploded. And Access was founded on the principle that access to an unfettered internet is critical to enable free, full, and safe participation for citizens in today's society. Since 2009, Access has expanded outside of Iran and provides not only technical support to digital rights activists, to journalists, to bloggers, and the like, but also advocates to ensure that policies, practices, and laws that regulate the internet are consistent with international and national obligations on human rights, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, and here in Europe, the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Ensuring that the internet remains neutral and universal in the EU is important not only to protect the right of EU citizens, but also for citizens around the world, particularly as the EU consistently serves as a global standard setter in the preservation and promotion of civil rights, particularly in the online environment. Next slide. So why is net neutrality important? The free and open internet is consistently under threat. Sometimes it's through a government threat, like in Iran in 2009, or as it continues to be, or currently in Turkey as protests have just erupted over the past few days. But it's also under threat through corporate actors, through corporate censorship, when large monopolies behave in anti-competitive ways. Frank LaRue, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, in his report has underlined the fact that the internet is a window through which human rights can be realized. And any restrictions on the right of individuals to freely express themselves and impart information must meet strict criteria under international human rights law. So maintaining the openness of this internet is the only way that human rights can actually flourish online. But the internet is also good for economic growth. The OECD and the World Bank have consistently recognized the internet as both a component of fundamental internet economic infrastructure and as a new source of growth in both the developing and in developed countries. Slide. But these principles of openness are under strain in Europe. The BEREC study, the body of European regulators for electronic communications, in its joint investigation that was published in May 2012, revealed that at least 20%, which is 100 million European citizens, are subject to arbitrary restrictions on their internet access, and even more on their mobile connections. This includes various types of network discrimination, the blocking of applications and services such as voice over IP like Skype or peer-to-peer like Spotify, slowing or throttling speeds, blocking websites. We heard earlier about the arbitrary blocking of La Quadrature's site, and then providing preferential access to certain services and platforms. So for instance, on the latter point, Deutsche Telekom has recently imposed strict data caps for subscribers, which in itself is not necessarily discriminatory. However, Deutsche Telekom does not count your data against its own platform, T-Entertain, and it also provides preferential access to Spotify, which effectively reduces the availability of platforms that provide legal access to content online. So, despite the mounting evidence of network discrimination, only the Netherlands and most recently Slovenia have enshrined these principles into law in the European Union. So what do we risk not taking action? Tim Wu, the academic who coined the term network neutrality, has found in his research that despite the fact that a neutral platform is good for citizens and operators, he found in his research that operators may have paid less attention to their long-term interests and choose rather to favor short-term results. The study was conducted in the United States, but the same restrictions have been applied by telcos here in Europe. Basically, it's an increasing tendency to want to ban new or emerging applications or network attachments, such as virtual private networks or voice over IP. And by banning these applications or favoring their own services, this is likely to distort the market and the future of application development. If businesses believe that it is not in their best interest to be neutral, then it's clear that neither self-regulation nor soft law will successfully persuade them to act in a manner that is thought to be contrary to their commercial interests. Next slide. So an example of this type of short-term thinking on behalf of operators is the explosion of mobile technology. The age of the home PC is over, and the future is mobile. Increasingly, people around the world access the internet through this type of technology, and in fact, many countries around the world have skipped landline connections altogether and gone straight to wireless. In sub-Saharan Africa, for example, there are 8 times as many users with wireless broadband subscriptions than there are with fixed connections. But here in Europe, this is where most of the restrictions are happening. If only 20% of users on fixed lines are subject to arbitrary restrictions, there is 36%, or more than 1/3 of European citizens are affected by this. Governments and NGOs have begun to depend on reliable and unfettered wireless connections to deliver many of their services and information. In developing countries, there is more information online than in printed books. And they emphasize mHealth and e-commerce initiatives as a means to penetrate rural markets. If restrictions slow the implementation of universal access, it will not only stunt economic growth and innovation, but it will also restrict access to social, health, education, and human rights services. If the EU does not protect the neutrality of the internet, a region of the world with strong civil rights frameworks, democracy, and the rule of law, then what will come of other regions that may lack such frameworks, with even less competition between telcos, and where the line between the public and the private sectors are even more blurry? Next slide. So, if the strategy is to wait and see, as Commissioner Cruz more or less reaffirmed this morning, to wait for operators to act in what they believe is not in their best economic interest, we will see the telcos create an internet that looks more like the TV than a platform for free expression. Member states will be able to use these same loopholes to pursue various public policy objectives that would curb unwanted speech and suppress content. Joe McNamee earlier in his intervention explained the blocking gambling sites in the EU as an example. And, of course, let's not forget the powerful content industry, which seeks to make ISPs liable for the enforcement and protection of intellectual property online. Essentially, the damage to the market and to the internet itself would be irreparable, and there would be no coming back. Enshrining the principle of non-discrimination into law in Europe is fundamental to ensure the flourishing of fundamental rights and the preservation and promotion of innovation and competition in the European digital single market. Thanks.
Thanks for your intervention. So, Christopher is...
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks first of all for the invitation to the event. Vice President Kroes said in the beginning that net neutrality is a very interesting debate and also a debate where we can find a lot of common ground, and I think she's very right, not just on that point, but she's very right on that because I heard a lot of common ground actually, and when we go beyond the slogans and headlines, I think we have a lot of common ground. What I will try to do is also help a little bit with the polarizing debate because I heard, I think we have, I mean, I'm the first one from the industry to speak and to give our views as well. Can you go to the first slide, please? What I think would be important to start with when you talk about net neutrality, and actually this event is called Open Internet and not net neutrality, is that the internet is much more complex than just a pure debate about the access to the internet. I think we have to be aware that we are talking about a very complex ecosystem which evolved very fastly over the last years, very successfully, in an open environment, yes. And that today, when you use a service, you actually touch a lot of these different parts of what we call the value chain. Let's give you an example. When you use a YouTube video, it depends if you use it through an application of YouTube. This depends again on the mobile operating system you're on. If you use an Android or an iOS, an Apple smartphone, this will then go through an access network of an operator you have chosen. This will then go to some core networks, and it will end up at a server by a company which provides you this video. And there might be billing involved and other things. This is a quite complex ecosystem. It's not just about this access. And this is, I think, very important to state here. So when I talk to policymakers, I always give the same advice. I always say, think about interest here. Don't think about slogans, think about interest. This is a very vivid marketplace. There's a lot of interest involved. There are content providers, there are, of course, big associations, there are big operators like ours, and there are a lot of interest involved. So this is, I think, just a starting point. Next slide, please. Telefonica has around 100 million customers in Europe.
We have quite close relationship to them, a contractual relationship. They pay money to us for the internet access and for voice services, SMS, and all different kind of services we provide to them. 100 million customers means around every sixth European is a customer of us. When we talk to them, actually, yes, they care a lot about their internet connection. I mean, they want to be better connected, of course. They want to have higher speeds, always on, and these kind of issues, for sure. And that's why we invest. That's why I invest in fiber networks. That's why I invest in 4G mobile networks to provide these services. At the same time, they also are concerned with privacy, security of their experience on the internet. They are, of course, very much concerned with transparent and fair conditions. But by the way, for all services they use on the internet, not just for their internet access. And there is a feeling, of course, around openness. And this is around being interconnected, being able to access the services and the applications of your choice, having something like a portable digital life where you can take with you, you can control. It's about control and transparency and openness. And we hear these, because we, as I said, these are our customers. And try to get even more. So when I hear about complaints about Deutsche Telekom, I can just invite you. We are a competitor of Deutsche Telekom in Germany. Please come to us. Yeah, please come. So I want to make a clear point here. We are not against the open internet. I want to make that very clear. We are for the open internet. This is, by the way, how we make a lot of money, because we provide access to the open internet. And it's totally for sure that, of course, people use the internet because there are a lot of interesting services there. I mean, I would never disagree with that. And I think we also support fully our customers' access to the internet service they want to use, to the applications, to the devices they want to use, and the contents of their choice. We are not against that. But I think an important factor is that it needs to be based on the customer. It needs to be based on what the customer wants. I think Vice President Kroes said it very clearly. It needs to be a customer choice. We cannot dictate, what kind of internet people should use or should be able to use. They should freely decide based on transparent information. So next slide, please. So when we talk about what could provide this kind of environment, I think the most important things are, and I totally agree here again with the Commissioner, transparency and fair competition. I think we see on the transparency side that, yes, there are problems. I mean, we should not say that there are no problems with transparency. There are problems. We have to improve the information of our customers, what is happening with their internet access, and what kind of basically package, so to speak, they have bought, what kind of services they can use, and all of that. By the way, my company, Telefonica, as I said, we serve a sixth of the European population, is not blocking VoIP. So I think we can agree on that this is not at least the business model we follow. On the contrary, we have, for example, in Germany launched a tariff recently which is purely based on your data usage. I think, again, follow the interest. Why should we block services on the internet when people pay for data usage? I don't see that. So the second thing is, and this is very important, we have competitive access markets. And I think going forward, and policy should also be about forward-looking and not about the past. I think going forward, you see market dynamics in Europe shaping up to make the markets even more competitive. If the Vice President says switching needs to be improved, okay, let's talk about that. If there's a problem with switching, fine. We are open to competition. We are open. We're fighting for customers. We're spending a lot of marketing money to get customers to use our services. We are not against customers, please. I mean, this is a little bit too easy, and I think it should be a little more balanced when we talk about these issues. So I believe that the market dynamics show clearly that we see currently new 4G services, mobile services taking up. What does that mean? That means you get basically the connection speed of what you are used from your ADSL on your mobile phone. This is what's happening currently while we speak here. These networks are built, they cost a lot of money, and they will provide even more possibilities for consumers to use to access the internet. We have, of course, as we heard, Wi-Fi. We have, for more rural areas, for example, satellite solutions for broadband. We have cable now moving into this space and offering broadband access as well. So I think the choices here are increasing. If you would have thought 10 years ago that you would have all these possibilities to access the internet, I think people would have been very happy. I think we see a lot of very positive dynamics here. And the second thing is, and that's why, again, think about business interests. We see a transition of our industry of charging for voice and SMS, which was the classical, basically, way of providing the money for the investments, to a database. I just gave you the example of what we're doing in our German business, and I think this is very important because it will shows you that there is a shift of the thinking in the industry, and this will at the same time relax a lot of the issues we've seen in the past around non-discriminatory or discriminatory thinking about services. Of course, let's be very honest, if you provide your business model on voice and then there's suddenly, through the data connection, a competing service, and you had to basically balance the usage of your customers on a kind of average basis, I mean, you have a lot of stresses in your business model, and I think that a lot of the issues we've seen are transitionary problems which will go away very quickly, and I think they are going away already. So, just to end, because people said it before already, we have a lot of existing rules already. Our industry, I think, is one of the most regulated you can think of. We have not only one regulator watching us, we usually have a regulatory authority specialized on our sector. We have a competition authority behind that, and then we have European levels doing the same. So I think, honestly, you cannot say that any behavior which is non-competitive will go unnoticed. You see, for example, again, we discussed the situation in Germany, and I'm not here to defend a competitor, but honestly, we've seen a lot of noise in the press. We have seen the political environment getting very involved. We've seen the regulator getting involved. We've seen the competition authority getting involved. I don't think that you can say that there's any kind of clandestine behavior here around, that there's no transparency around what's happening. This is an open debate, and we have all the tools in the hands of regulators to intervene and to do things. Next slide, please. When you talk about regulation, and I think this was the topic of this panel as well, what happens with regulation, is it good or not for net neutrality? I think I'm not here to say if there should be regulation or not. This is for the policymakers to make up their mind. I just want to say I think it's very important to think about three different issues here. First of all, traffic management. Traffic management is important, and I think will be important going forward. But let's be very clear. Traffic management, of course, cannot be used for non-competitive behavior on the internet. I mean, we have to distinguish here between a kind of fair traffic management and a traffic management to do something which people would feel is not good. Again, I don't think our customers would want us to do that, and I believe that people can change their providers. So why should we basically do these things? I don't see it. Second thing, innovation. We talk about innovation. I think the freedom to innovate is also true for our industry. So when we talk about innovation, please, again, think about the whole value chain. I don't think that we should be restricted in the way we find new business models. If there are competitive problems, again, there are enough regulators to look into that, and to going forward, we will see them, improving. But honestly, I mean, why should our industry be the only one which is tied into ex-ante regulatory framework while all the rest of the ICT ecosystem is innovating, and by the way, always not always in a good way as well. So I think this needs to include ways of charging in a different way, and again, why not? The Spotify offer was mentioned. I can tell you that we did the same in a very similar offer in Spain. And I can tell you customers are very happy about it because they get a good access to legal music content, which is not always the case. And we are happy and Spotify is happy. What's so bad about that? What's so bad about that business model? By the way, Spotify is one of the very, very few internet service players we have in Europe at all, because Europe, unfortunately, is not very innovative in that regard. So, and the third thing is the market evolution. again, this sector is so fast changing that be very careful with any regulation. These things are evolving over time. The market we've seen 3 years ago is not the market we see today. Things have changed incredibly and are going to change in the future incredibly. Not everything will be good, but also not everything will be bad. So be very careful in dictating ex ante before you even have seen things, what's going to happen. We see a lot of fear about what might happen. Let's be a little bit more, I think, open also to experiments and to see if things cannot work out in the end. So in summary, and this is my last slide, I think that the parliament, that the political debate should be a little bit more ambitious. Let's talk about really what an open internet means. Let's talk about interconnectivity of service. Let's talk about open standards. Let's talk about the control of customers about their digital life. Let's talk about human rights. I totally agree. Let's talk about human rights, freedom of speech, fantastic. Let's talk about how we can safeguard fair competition. That's good. I mean, competition is good. Competition has brought the internet to all of you in the past. We don't rely anymore all the time on copper networks. We rely on new mobile networks. We rely on fiber networks built out. So this is competition. This is brought by competition, and we totally support that. We are not sitting here to say we want anti-competitive behavior on your internet access, please. So allow for innovation, but allow for innovation for everyone. Don't discriminate yourself against some part of the value chain against others. And the final thing, think about investments. I mean, we can talk about prices going up and down. We can talk about margins going up and down. Of course, there are efficiency gains. I totally agree. But you will see a lot of investments going forward if this industry is going to thrive. Not just by our part of the industry, also of course by service providers who invest a lot in other parts of service and so on. But you will see investments, and someone needs to come up with ideas and business model to find the funding for these investments. So this will be my final remarks. Let's be a bit more ambitious here, and let's think really and have an open debate about what an open internet should look like in Europe. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. I think that your intervention was very interesting, not contradictory with the previous intervention, which was pleading for an European approach with the phenomenon who is no more limited to national regulators and should be developed. I think that Guglielmo for the European Consumer Organization will have to add something to complete your intervention.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. De Capitani, and thank you to Access Now and to Ms. Verheyen and to Ms. Schaake for inviting us on setting up this very timely debate, very important debate. Just for those of you who do not know, ASPEUC, the European Consumer Organization, is a European-wide federation of national consumer organizations. We represent the interests of more or less 40 independent consumer organizations. We've been working on the issue of net neutrality for some years now. First, during the times of the telecom package, warning that the telecom package, the provisions that aim to protect net neutrality in the telecom package were not enough. And now that evidence that net neutrality is not being respected across Europe, now we're begging that can we please do something. I must say, personally, I'm very satisfied to see many enthusiastic defenders of net neutrality today here in the room. You guys have done my job. I have not a lot more to say, but to echo a couple of points and add some things that have not been said today. So I agree with many of the speakers today that net neutrality needs to be very strongly protected at a European level, which is the issue that pertains to our panel today. And I celebrate the fact Mrs. Schaake's initiative on her website. I invite you all to read it, that she has launched today, calling on the European Commission to protect it at European level. Now, we all hear a lot of, from a consumer, let's focus on a consumer perspective, we all hear a lot of buzzwords. We hear competition, switching, transparency, consumers vote with their feet, and so on. Competition is good for consumers. If there's competition in the telecoms market, that's good. Switching is good. They can vote for their feet. Transparency is good. But the real consumer issue here, in that subset of the value chain that Telefonica was talking about, is traffic management. Is whether or not there is undue discrimination and restrictions on their connection. A transparent wrong is still wrong, whether it is transparent or not. And that's the most important thing for consumers. And I want to mention one of our members in the UK, Consumer Focus, now called Consumer Futures, did a big survey to ask UK consumers how well they understood traffic management issues and whether or not that would be a key factor in informing their decision to select one provider or the other. You won't be surprised. Very few people knew what traffic management is about. What are the issues that entail it? And I say this because one of the issues that I want to put on the table as well is that of consumer expectations. The internet, since we know it, has been about just you plug and you play. You just get an access to the big network and you do virtually anything you want with the restrictions that come with the service, the quality of service, the speed. But there is no undue discrimination. There is no point in the road you cannot reach. So, like Jean-Jacques Sahel from Skype was saying earlier, I fully agree. It is not the internet if it's not the full internet, and we need to be very honest about that. So from our perspective, the problem is that if we only ask telecom operators to ensure a full internet access offers as a champagne offer, what we're actually de facto doing is legitimizing that they start competing on restricted access offers. And that will become the norm. That will start changing expectations. And I think that could be the end of the internet as we know it. Thank you.
Thanks. It's up to you.
Thank you. My name is Luca Belli, and I'm here on behalf of the Council of Europe. Thank you to the organizers of this event for the organization. It's an extremely important initiative, and it is also follow-up to the multi-stakeholder dialogue on network neutrality and human rights that the Council of Europe has hosted last week. So I'm here to try to briefly elucidate the engagement of the Council of Europe in the network neutrality debate and some of the initiatives that have been scrutinized by the Council of Europe in order to foster a neutral and open internet environment. So according to the internet governance strategy of the Council of Europe, the 47 members of the Council of Europe, because the Council of Europe, as a disclaimer, it is not an institution of the European Union. We are a regional organization that encompasses 47 different members. According to the IG strategy, the 47 members have mandated the Council of Europe with the task of developing human rights, public policy principles on network neutrality to ensure that internet users have the greatest possible access to content, services, and application as a part of the public service value of the internet and in full respect of human rights. So the three basic elements are the greatest possible access to applications, content, and services. And this is the network neutrality principles that is enshrined in the 2009 declaration of, elaborated by the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers. And the other two elements, the public service value of the internet and the full respect of human rights in the online environment, stems directly from the 2007 recommendation on measures to promote the public service value of the internet. So in the prologue of this declaration, of this recommendation, the members have agreed that access and use of internet are essential in order to enjoy the fundamental rights and freedom that are granted by the Convention in the online environment, and they have considered the public service value of the internet as a significant reliance of European people on the internet as an essential tool for the everyday activities. So the essential role of the internet since then has been highlighted both at the national and the international level in Europe. Examples are from the French Constitutional Council that has highlighted that access to the internet is essential in order to directly participate in democratic life. recently the European Court of Human Rights in the Hildering case has highlighted that the internet is one of the principal means in order to enjoy freedom of expression and access to information. So the core question with regard to network neutrality is to grant a neutral and open environment on which pluralism is granted on the internet and through the internet. And to this extent, traffic measures, traffic management measures should be analyzed, and it should be assessed whether these traffic measures can grant the full respect of human rights or whether they cannot. And the issue is not to say that traffic management is evil per se. The issue is to identify when traffic management respect human rights. So it could be extremely useful for some technical purposes, such as preventing the proliferation of malware or spam, or in some cases for congestion management, because when networks are under attack, such as distributed denial service attack, internet service providers have the opportunity to manage congestions, and they can also be prescribed by states and national authorities. But these prescriptions are limitation of freedom of expression, Article 10. And Article 10, Paragraph 2 says that limitations have to be prescribed by law, have to pursue a legitimate aim, and have to be necessary in a democratic society. So these criteria have been specified recently in the Hildering case by the European Court of Human Rights, and that has clearly stated that restriction on access on source of information can be compatible with the convention exclusively when a strict legal framework is in place that regulate the scope of the ban and that afford guarantee for judicial review in order to prevent abuses. That means that the jurisprudence of the court is clear. What is necessary is to build a bridge between the Council of Europe dimension and the European Union dimension. Such bridge seems to have built by the telecom package, because Article 1.3a of Directive 2009/140 states that restriction to access and use of services and applications have to be in conformity with the European Convention. The problem is that the telecom package doesn't say how these fundamental rights have to be applied and who has to be applied to apply them. And that has been highlighted by BEREC, that has recently stated that it has no competence to apply human rights in network neutrality disputes. And the main issue is then to clarify how to apply a convention, if the convention has to be applied and who has to apply it. The second kind of concern, and I'm going to finish with this, is that the Council of Europe is concerned that a mere competition law approach cannot grant fundamental freedom, the enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms online. That has been highlighted by the recent study by BEREC and the European Commission that have underscored that an incredible amount of restrictions is applied by internet service providers, and that over 50% of internet service providers restrict the use of applications such as voice over IP or peer-to-peer applications. The restrictions of that legal applications is a limitation of the right to freely impart and receive information. So, for these reasons, the Council of Europe is taking into consideration the elaboration of a model framework on network neutrality that will be proposed by the members, to the members of the Council of Europe, because as Jean-Jacques Sahel was highlighting, there is already a consistent body of law. That body has just to be clarified, perhaps following the example of the Dutch and the Slovenians, and the Norwegian as well. So to conclude, the position of the Council of Europe is that an open and neutral internet environment provides the best conditions to let the spirit of the European Convention on Human Rights flourish. And these conditions have to be maintained. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thanks, Luca, to remind us that the European Union is bound not only by the European Convention of Human Rights, but also by the jurisprudence of the Strasbourg Court. Moreover, I'm very doubtful that BEREC, which is a European body, European Union body, could not implement fundamental rights. What is without doubt is that the Commission should do and comply with fundamental rights as defined in Article 6 of the treaty. So now let's pass the floor to Luigi Gambardella, that I think everyone in this room knows very well.
Thank you very much, Emilio, and thank you very much for the invitation to this very important workshop. I think that we should have more occasion to have such kind of discussion here in the European Parliament. At the end, this is our home, and I think it's important to have such kind of confrontation. Now, a lot of things have been said, and I will not have a speech, I will not use it. And also because Christophe has been, I share 100% what he has said, and also he has anticipated similar argument that I wanted to raise others today. But let me start from one important point. I think that here there is someone who is trying to create a situation in which the operators are against the consumer. We don't see the situation in this way. We believe that we should share a common goal. And what is the common goal that we have? Not only to preserve the internet of today, but work together in order to have a better internet in the future. And so this is, I think, something with what we should do in a very open and transparent way. Now, and another point which has been raised by my colleague is previously, we take very serious the views of the consumers, that at the end are our customers. And I can tell you, the last thing we would like to do is to lose our customer. Because if we lose our customer, we have a problem. So now, let me focus on some points that I would like to stress again, and then I try also to introduce a new argument that has not been so far discussed. Europe, we have never to forget that Europe is the region with the highest level of competition in the world. There are in Europe about, these are not number of OECD, numbers of the European Commission, we have, you know that, around 3,000 players in Europe. You know that as customer you experience the lowest price, among the lowest price in the world. A colleague of Jeremy, I asked to him the same question from US, is paying much more, $100, $160 per month. So, and we, I think we should remember that the dinosaurs, I saw that I arrived a little bit late this morning, but I know that one of other panelists has called us in this way. We invest, and are the only one that do this, 44 billion per year in order to keep such kind of level of infrastructure in Europe. And the funny thing, despite this situation, which is an objective one, these are facts, we are discussing in Europe to regulate internet with the net neutrality, to introduce a new regulation. And as far as I know, by large, outside Europe, there are only few countries that have introduced regulation on net neutrality. I don't remember, please, if on the floor there is one apart, I think Chile, if there are countries outside Europe that have a law on net neutrality. And we are the most competitive region in the world, with the most players offering services, and so this means more choice for customers. At lowest price, we would like to introduce another law in Europe. Now, let's start from what the consumer are asking for. Because we are here to address the request of our consumer, of our customer. They are asking for, they are demanding us to have choice. And because this is what they want. And in order to give them choice, we need to be allowed to differentiate our offers. And we need what is word flexibility. The alternative would be to have the same price for everybody, and this would mean that someone will pay more for other customers. Now, you know very well, and this example is not mine, it's from one important official of the European Commission. He was in another panel, he was saying, well, we should have allowed in Europe to buy a Ferrari, to buy a Panda, to buy other cars. And it's normal that when you buy something, you know that the price can be different, but also the speed can be different, the quality of the product that you buy can be different. What is the important thing? And on this, we have to commit ourselves to do more. I agree also with Christoph. Transparency. To know what you are buying and what you are paying for. Let me also very clear on one point that on anti-competitive blocking, throttling of internet services has no place in an open internet. We share completely this view. And as I said, we are also committed, and we can do more in order to improve this, to provide more transparency, whether is needed. But at the same time, we don't see the need to regulate further and to introduce a new regulation on net neutrality in Europe. Also because, always looking at the facts, you know that the Citizen Rights Directive provides some safeguard for net neutrality. And this provision have not even been used in most member states. So let's use the tool that we have. Let's see if there are problems and if this tool works. If not, we will consider the situation. We have the tool in order to protect the consumer. Now, there is one point that I would like to raise, that is this one. Before in the panel, I'm sorry again because I was late and I was not able to follow the entire debate. There was one colleague of BBC, right? So I think that today we should be very also clear on this point. What the consumer and the citizen, if I may, are asking for is also to be sure that they can have access to the content, to the information, and not only to the service. I would like to understand why BBC is limiting the availability of ePlay, that is very good service for Europe, because we are European citizens. We are here to create the European single digital market, but we have not the same rights as citizens to have the possibility to have access to what? To content, to information. I would like to understand why some European broadcasters that are paid by us are not providing the information to all European citizens. So I think that if I were a politician, I will not just look at an important issue that is, we agree and we are here to discuss, and if something has to be done, but not only on the access side, but on the access to the information. Because the real discrimination is that some citizens, they have access to some information, and you know that the value is there, and others are not. I would like, as a European citizen, when I travel, to have access to my iPlay service without any restriction. So I think that this is an important issue, and I hope that the European Parliament will also consider further this aspect that is very important if you want to keep internet open and transparent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luigi. And now the last intervention is by Mrs. Andersdotter for the Green.
Thank you. So the copyright issue certainly is very big and complex, and I'm happy that the telecommunications operators are noticing it in the Spotify case and in the BBC case. But I think it's also off topic. So we know already that this is a big and complex issue. It's been since the beginning of the 1990s, and we're hoping that it will resolve itself in due time, but today we were discussing net neutrality. So I've always been struck, since I came to Brussels in 2010, that the net neutrality discussions are a weird combination of being unable to distinguish what is technical from what is political. So whenever we've been talking about net neutrality here, we've heard that the internet is very complex, the value chain is very complex, and so is the technology. The contractual relationships between different parties in this value chain are very complex. But so I think the consumer group intervention, Boak's intervention, really showed that this isn't very complex. It's about what consumers are expecting from their internet connections. It's about consumers having access to the services that they choose, but also for services to have access to consumers. When you talk about the human rights issue, it's about people not only being able to listen to what other people say, it's also about people finding people that want to hear what people say. And so the society organization that we would be looking to protect with net neutrality is actually the situation where you can speak to anyone and anyone can speak to you. And politically, that is a really trivial conclusion to make. You don't need to bring in the complex value chain issues, and you don't need to talk about the technology. We're looking to save the interactions between people. That said, I'm also very happy that the Council of Europe seems to be doing a lot of work on this. I hope that you have successes in that. I know that there are telecommunications regulators in Europe that have tried to intervene on net neutrality but found the current legal framework insufficient. Competition law works only between market actors, so it's difficult to express things like human rights or the rights of individuals therein. This is why we use consumer rights legislation on top of competition law in other sectors, like the furniture market. I would have hoped that the Commission could have been more bold in their advancements of net neutrality legislation. Personally, I was very happy when in 2009 they seemed to take the issue very seriously, and I've been persistently disappointed since, as there has come no concrete proposals to the table. But I think that I will stop there because I don't need to say so much more, actually.
Maybe we have now some minutes to have some question. Please, Mr.
If it's okay, Chair, I just wanted to make a quick comment rather than a question, if it's okay. I wanted to strongly support what Christoph Steck was saying about their commitment to the open internet and having tariffs which are based on the amount of data used. I think that's great. There's maybe a problem, though, between your pledge of allegiance to the open internet and Luigi saying anti-competitive behaviour is not okay, and the 236 million. So I don't know where the problem comes in. Clearly you're not able to cooperate with your colleagues. That would be a cartel, so you can't simply get in a room together and sort it out. So you may be victims of the behaviour of others, and obviously regulation applies to everybody. But I wanted to address one other point that you and Luigi both raised, which is, why is it all about us and why is it not about the others? Well, there's a very good reason, namely telecoms markets are oligopolistic markets. There's a limited amount of competition that can happen, therefore there's a limited amount of competition, a limited amount of dynamism. It's very different when you get to over-the-top markets, where there's a lot more players, very large, very small, and I would like to point out that there are a number of over-the-top players who are or have been investigated using competition powers, which are there when you have markets which are competitive. Whatever people will think of the kind of settlements that may or may not be arrived at, Microsoft has been investigated and regulated, for example, in browser choice. Google is being investigated. I don't know what the settlement will be, but it'll happen before net neutrality.
Gentleman on his side with the tie is you. Okay.
Jens Jeppesen with CDT, the Center for Democracy and Technology. We were debating, you get the impression from the last panel that we were still debating whether or not there is an issue, whether there are problems in the marketplace. And I think the numbers quoted by James in the previous panel, the studies by Berek have shown that that these problems are real and exist in very, very substantial numbers. And we don't think there's any sign that competitive pressures are taking care of these problems. So we do think that the Commission does need to step in now and establish basic expectations around net neutrality principles for internet access services. So those services that provide the end user with access to the whole smorgasbord of content and applications on the internet. We need to address the distinction between specialized services. We have some ideas how to do that. The point raised by Chris in the previous panel, and these principles need to apply equally to mobile as to fixed networks. That is clear, and it seems to me that what's at stake and what the reason this needs to happen is to do with innovation and deployment of innovative services across the digital single market. And it would seem to me that those divisions of network operators that develop these innovative new services and want to deploy these services, they will want to do that not only in their home markets to their own local subscribers, they'll want to do that across the board. And they will depend on network neutrality principles applying and common carriage principles applying to the connections of customers in other countries. So in that sense, you would be in the same boat. At least the division of your company that develops these services would be in the same boat as small companies that rely on the open internet to connect with customers all over the world. Thank you.
The possibility to the podium to react, I will take two other questions from Jeremy and from Madsen. Jeremy.
Thank you. Metaphors about the physical environment when speaking about internet always have their limits, but I want to take on Luigi's comment about selling a Ferrari or a Fiat. I'm not very much knowledgeable with cars, but to me it looks like you can buy a Ferrari or a Panda. You can sell internet access that will be faster than another one. You can sell internet access that will be a better quality of service guaranteed than another one, until you don't discriminate. To prolongate your analogy, what would be done with discriminated internet access would be selling a Ferrari or a Fiat that would be allowed only to go on certain roads, and where the manufacturer could remotely disable the ability to take such or such crossing. This would, of course, be unacceptable in the physical reality. The problem is what we are dealing with here is agreement between the operators. We've seen it on the mobile market where the price is so much inflated compared to the cost. Look at the roaming fees for SMS, for instance. It's barely the same cost for the operator, but the price is 10 times higher, and Mrs. Cruz is very sensitive to this argument, I know. So we are speaking of agreement that goes way beyond competition law, because the consumer is a party, and the consumer cannot be a party in any competition action. Also, we're concerned because those agreements go way beyond the agreement between operators. In France, it is now notorious that Orange signed a deal with Google. You know, oh, all this bandwidth, all this YouTube, so expensive, therefore we have to throttle it until Google pays us. What about this agreement? What are the conditions? It is private, we cannot know. And I'm sure that Google pays to Orange much more than the actual cost of the bandwidth. Hence, the occasion I would like to give to Mr. Gambardella to answer my question. Can you tell us precisely what is the cost of bandwidth in an offer, whether it's 30 or 100 euros a month, but for a 10 megabit per second or 30 megabit per second, can you tell us the precise price of the bandwidth in the cost of the offer, and then we can talk.
Chris.
Yeah, in fact, I can help Jeremy with that, because one of the outcomes of BEREC's work that has been, I think, a little bit overlooked is BEREC did some work with the OECD on IP traffic and internet exchanges. And you can, of course, go to an internet exchange, you could London Internet Exchange or Amsterdam Internet Exchange, and you can see the actual price of bandwidth. And the price of bandwidth on a wholesale level in these internet exchanges is 1,000 times lower than the price that the ISP charges at the endpoint. Now, the ISP has to do various things in order to deliver to the endpoint, and we accept that, but the difference in price is 1,000 times. And so when we talk about bandwidth caps, let's please be realistic. The information's out there. The OECD has recently released a study about the way internet exchanges operate. Over 99.8% of contracts are simply handshake contracts. They don't even have to have a written contract. But where we do see prices, they're over 1,000 times different. So I think we have to be realistic when we say data caps might be reasonable. Reasonable in whose universe?
Last intervention on, please.
Maël Brunet from Open from Europe. I had a question for the gentleman from Telefonica. You said that everyone was happy with your bundle offer with Spotify. I'm sure Spotify's competitors would have something to say about that. Which brings me to my question, and it's a genuine question. I'm really interested to have your views on this. Do you think ISPs should have a say in the kind of content that internet users are accessing? Do you think it's their role to have a say in that?
To the podium, who want to react? There is still one. We have time? Okay, please.
Thank you. So I just wanted to come back to Luigi's point, his touching concern about access to iPlayer, because he mentioned it. Two quick points. You can access a great deal of content here in Belgium or in Italy. Content, all our news content for your citizenship concerns, but also the international iPlayer. It's a different service from what you get in the UK, and there are two very clear reasons for that. The first is around the scope of the offer. So there are some rights-related reasons, and that's being extensively covered in Licensing Europe. But more importantly, iPlayer is a catch-up service. It allows you to catch up on television that you've missed on linear channels. Now, you can only get those linear channels in the UK. Benelux is a very odd exception to that because of historic retransmission and overspill, satellite overspill reasons. But in Italy and the vast majority of the rest of Europe and the world, you can't access BBC channels. So the idea that you want a service which catches up on those is frankly nonsensical. What instead we offer is a best of British content, which is the international iPlayer. You are freely available to subscribe to that here. And just finally, on the other thing that differs is the terms on which you do that. So UK citizens pay a license fee. People outside the UK don't. So there is a requirement, legal requirement, on the BBC to make sure that it's done on a commercial basis. So it's a subscription service in Belgium. Anyway, that just hopefully clarifies some of those issues. I hope we can focus now on net neutrality and some of the questions which have been stacking up for you from other participants.
Now, we are already late with our, I hope that we will have some more time. 3 minutes for each one in the podium who want to react. Let's start with Mr. Luigi, but 3 minutes. Yes. Thanks.
Okay, even less. This clarify why I see it easy to justify the way to restrict the content in Europe, no? Because everyone then, when it's up to them, when you speak about the other, it is easier to say what to do. Then when you refer to you, you try to justify why I'm an European citizen and I would like to have the possibility to have a restricted possibility to have access to BBC and to other content in Europe. Because I feel to have access to BBC is much more important, it's very important for an European citizen, but that's another matter. I would like also to try to answer to James. I'm very astonished by his capacity, it's really great, because a few months ago, you know that James, he represents an association mainly of US operators, US companies, not operators. And I'm amazed because we have had such kind of discussion a few months ago in Dubai at international level, and he was saying the opposite. That was not necessary to discuss internet neutrality. This was not an issue, and at international level, now we are speaking at European level. I saw that you have a different position on this. I'm very happy to see that. I think that there is one point that is this. As I said, we are one of the most regulated regions in the world. But this is not enough. We have the tools, because we have many telecom regulators, we have many antitrust authority, both at European level, at a national level. So, if there are behavior, because we have 3,000 operators in Europe, maybe that someone is doing wrong thing, there are all the tools to intervene and to check whether they are doing right thing or are doing wrong thing. But we don't see any need for this reason to introduce a new legislation in Europe. Thank you.
A message already sent very clearly. Now, who will take the floor for the... up to you.
Thank you. Very quickly to come back to something that Luigi said before on that consumers want choice. Of course, consumers want choice. Of course, there should be some flexibility for operators to innovate and so on. But I need to re-stress the point that the internet is a special access to the internet is a special service. It is not the internet if you cannot access the entire internet. So if you want to innovate, let's find some other ways. But when you sell an access to the internet, make it be full. That's your starting point. Thank you.
Luca.
I will be very brief, and I would like to analyze for 1 second the argument according to which an efficient and competitive market equals to a market that is respectful of human rights. I know that when in European institutions one should religiously respect competition, so I hope you will excuse my profane words. But the thing is that the assumption according to which an efficient and competitive market produces automatically an efficient allocation of speech should be carefully taken into consideration, and some extremely good food for thought is provided by the Berg study, highlighting that although the European market is extremely competitive, as Mr. Gambardella was underscoring, there are a lot of restrictions that are currently put in place, and a lot of legal services and applications are currently restricted. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess politically I still see this as kind of a trivial issue, because it's about getting everyone access to everyone else. And so the telecommunications operators just happen to be the infrastructure through which we do that. And as long as we've decided that we think that it's good that anyone can talk to anyone else, and that it's not up to some gateway keeper in between to make that choice for the consumer or for the user or for the citizen, politically these issues can be solved. Even at the technical level, these issues can be solved. And so our problem in Europe right now is that we have a commission that hasn't made that choice, potentially in violation, it appears, of the European Convention of Human Rights. And that is also a political problem that we need to solve.
I think that with this intervention we will close our work, which was very interesting, and already people who are at this room is here, so thanks to you all. And my closing remark will be, let's see what the Commission will do. Will it be an implementing recommendation of Article 19 of the Framework Directive? Will it be a new legislative initiative? Will be both? Maybe next Parliament will have to decide on it. Thanks to you all.